There are three reasons why I think residential schools are a blot on the Canadian landscape. One is that we became strangers in our home and native land. Two is that nurturing relationships between parents and children were severed. Residential schools were a frontal attack on parenthood. Three is that it added to our mental stress in a very real way.
It's starting to rain, and I really wanted to capture it on camera in case it stormed, because, you know what, this episode needs all the help it's gonna get. Now you can go up there. See, everybody's happy. If you're new here, hello everybody, welcome back to my channel. I am Jen, this is Fundie Fridays, and here on my channel I talk about different aspects of Christian fundamentalism while doing my makeup. Today is only slightly off topic by like 0.5%, so it's residential schools, which were essentially internment camps for Indigenous children. Those were run jointly by the government and the Catholic Church. So that's why we're discussing that, and I think it goes without saying we are going to be talking about a very serious and deeply troubling topic today. We will be discussing abuse of all kinds and a deep culture of systematic racism, so viewer discretion is advised. Specifically today, we are going to be talking about residential schools in North America. Keep in mind, these kinds of atrocities have been committed against Indigenous people all across the world, and I am narrowing the topic down today for the sake of practicality. I think this goes without saying. I am a white bitch from America. Sometimes I have bad takes, and sometimes I say the wrong thing, and I'm sorry, and I'm learning, and I'm doing my best. Look at my son. Isn't this so beautiful? Such a beautiful son. And we wouldn't have any of these problems like residential schools, internment camps, or slavery without colonialism, and in a broader sense, white supremacy. But I digress. I am not a scholar or a philosopher, so I'm not equipped to define such nebulous terms. I do, however, have a boyfriend who loves to do voiceovers, so here you go.
Colonialism is a practice of domination, which involves the subjugation of one people to another. One of the difficulties in defining colonialism is that it is hard to distinguish it from imperialism. Frequently, the two concepts are treated as synonyms. Like colonialism, imperialism also involves political and economic control over a dependent territory. The etymology of the two terms, however, provides some clues about how they differ. The term colony comes from the Latin word colonus, meaning farmer. This root reminds us that the practice of colonialism usually involved the transfer of population to a new territory, where the arrivals lived as permanent settlers while maintaining political allegiance to their country of origin. Imperialism, on the other hand, comes from the Latin term imperium, meaning to command. Thus, the term imperialism draws attention to the way that one country exercises power over another, whether through settlement, sovereignty, or indirect mechanisms of control. The argument known as the civilizing mission, which suggested that a temporary period of political dependence or tutelage was necessary in order for uncivilized societies to advance to the point where they were capable of sustaining liberal institutions and self-government. In other words, colonizers think that West is best, lol.
A traditional boarding school is a place where students are provided room and board on school grounds. Students live there, attending school, making friends, and doing activities. I don't know. I never went to one. As far as I'm concerned, this is what goes on at a boarding school. These residential schools that we're discussing are far removed from the academic, idyllic settings we may associate with other boarding schools. Truthfully, these places were schools in name only, and in practice operated as internment camps for Indigenous children. Children were ripped from their families, made to denounce their native culture, language, and identity.
That's where a lot of my whole life really started to change, because I got strapped. I got beaten up for speaking my own native tongue. I even had my tongue pulled out and pinched, They
were forced to perform extreme manual labor, and many, if not all, were physically and sexually abused. The treatment these children were subjected to is an absolute travesty and blight on humanity, and it should be fully recognized as genocidal action. And if you need further proof of that, check out this next clip.
Our objective is to continue until there is not a single Indian in Canada that has not been absorbed into the body politic, and there is no Indian question and no Indian department. Duncan Campbell Scott, Deputy Superintendent of Indian Affairs, January 1st, 1920. Indian children in the residential schools die at a much higher rate than in their villages. But this does not justify a change in the policy of this department, which is geared towards a final solution of our Indian problem.
I don't think anyone's debating this, but I would really like to point out that this is absolutely about race. In Australia, their Aboriginal people that they put in residential schools, they have this program where they are trying to literally breed out the Aboriginal. So, also just a quick editor's note, every time I say Indian, I'm only saying that because I'm quoting someone else. That is not the proper way to say that anymore, and I'm sorry if it is offensive to anybody, and I love you, goodbye. Beginning with the Indian Civilization Act Fund of March 3rd, 1819, and the Peace Policy of 1869, the United States, in concert with and at the urging of several denominations of the Christian Church, adopted an Indian boarding school policy expressly intended to implement cultural genocide through the removal and reprogramming of American Indian and Alaska Native children to accomplish the systematic destruction of Native cultures and communities. The stated purpose of this policy was to, quote, kill the Indian, save the man. Though we don't know how many children were taken in total, by 1900 there were 20,000 children in Indian boarding schools, and by 1925 that number had more than tripled. The boarding school system became more formalized under Grant's Peace Policy of 1869, which turned over the administration of Indian reservations to Christian denominations as part of this policy. Congress set aside funds to erect school facilities to be administered by churches and missionary societies. The rationale for choosing cultural rather than physical genocide was often economic. Carl Schurz concluded that it would cost $1 million to kill an Indian in warfare, whereas it would only cost $1,200 to school an Indian child for 8 years. At first, residential schools were on the reservations, but then somebody got the bright idea that they would just run away. So they started building them off reservation and taking the children to the schools to live there. The architect of Canada's residential schools policy wrote an 1879 paper which looked at boarding schools just established in the U.S. and urged Canada to create similar ones. On the basis of this paper, Canada's federal government opened 3 such schools starting in 1883 in the future province of Saskatchewan. The stated purpose of the Indian residential schools was to make the Indigenous peoples of Canada embrace Western values and Christianity. Those two sets of beliefs were almost inseparable at the time. In the eyes of many state officials, the agent that could and should bring about such rapid change was the Christian Church. Missionaries of all denominations embraced the cause of Christianizing and civilizing the Indigenous peoples in Canada long before the Davin Report of 1879. In the decades to come, the government turned over operation of most of the residential schools to the Roman Catholic and Anglican churches. All true civilization must be based on moral law, which Christian religion alone can give. Pagan superstition could not suffice. To make the Indians practice the virtues of our civilization and avoid its attendant vices, several people have desired us to countenance the dances of the Indians and to observe their festivals, but their habits, being the result of free and easy mode of life, cannot conform to the intense struggle for life which our social conditions require. To both Protestant and Catholic missionaries, Aboriginal spiritual beliefs were little more than superstition and witchcraft. In British Columbia, William Duncan of the Church Missionary Society reported, "I cannot describe the conditions of this people better than by saying that it is just what might be expected in savage heathen life." In some cases, residential schools grew out of orphanages and day schools set up by these orders or by women who joined the mission. In addition, several female religious orders supplied teachers, nuns, nurses, and administrators as the system developed. After the first decades of the 20th century, in their zeal to Christianize, the churches competed over students and kept the residential school system running long after the government began to realize that it was not achieving its goals. Prejudices against indigenous ways of life and a sense of cultural superiority eventually set the operators of these schools against their students and created the backdrop for the traumatic experiences of the humiliation, neglect, and dismissal of indigenous cultures.
I grew up not knowing my language, and in fact, I kind of felt a bit ashamed about our language and our identity because it seemed like they were, meaning my parents and my aunts and uncles, were ashamed too in some way because they didn't want to talk about it and they didn't want to share with us about who we were.
These kids were kidnapped, tortured, abused, and killed, all in an effort to turn them into submissive Christian laborers, and it's truly horrifying. Children were given inadequate food and medical care, and conditions were extremely derelict and overcrowded. According to the Boarding School Healing Project, Native children in South Dakota schools were often fed with one sandwich to last a whole day. Other children died from common medical ailments because of neglect. Everything that could go wrong at these schools did. Children were even used for experiments, and they had their hair cut, they were beaten for using their native language, and in more than one instance burned alive because they couldn't get out of a burning building fast enough. And not only were these children being killed by this heinous system, but many times the parents were never notified. Thousands of children went missing in these circumstances.
My strongest memory there is when the little girl died beside me. She must have been about 6. I was scared why the parents were not there. That's what I was scared about. And I knew they wouldn't feel comfortable for not being there when their daughter is dying.
And do you know why they weren't there?
They were never notified.
Although these schools were government funded, the residential schools were often operated by churches, with clergymen and women serving in most teaching and administrative roles. In 2009, Pope Benedict met leaders and expressed his sorrow for the experiences of the residential school survivors. Many critics argue that this was not a full apology, and I agree. This is my Lash redemption arc. I think we did it. Recently, 215 unmarked graves of Indigenous children were found via radar at what was once Canada's largest school for Indigenous children.
Sometimes kids would not show up in classroom. They would disappear for the next day, and we knew that they were gone, but we didn't know where they were gone.
Gary Gottfriedson is a survivor of the Kamloops Indian Residential School. He's among the thousands of Indigenous peoples legally mandated by the Canadian government to attend such institutions. They were set up in the late 1800s and often operated by the Catholic Church. The last one closed in 1997. A Truth and Reconciliation Commission was formed to investigate abuse at the Indian residential schools. In 2015, it issued a report saying the government committed cultural genocide. At least 4,000 students died at these schools, some of disease, neglect, accidents, or abuse. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau.
Saying sorry for the tragedies of the past is not enough. It is not enough for the children who died, for the families, or for the survivors and communities.
The heinous discovery happened after one of the Canadian First Nations used radar technology on the ground near the school.
Indigenous communities and families have been saying these things for decades, often not notified of deaths. Their children never return home, unable to get any sorts of answers.
In a statement that First Nations chief wrote, the true accounting of the missing students will hopefully bring some peace and closure to those lives lost. As for Gottfriedson, he's still haunted by the memories.
We were made to feel ugly because we were told we were ugly. We were made to feel like we were nothing but dirt. And that has remained with me to this very, very day. It's I've never felt that I was good enough for anything.
The Canadian government has paid more than $1.6 billion to survivors of these schools. That 2015 commission recommended 94 calls to action to help the country address its past treatment of Indigenous children. Indigenous communities are now calling for other school sites to also be searched for remains of school children.
In June of 2021, 700 more bodies were found, prompting Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau to ask for an apology from Pope Francis. As you can see here, the Pope expressed his sadness but refused to apologize, so I personally haven't seen a more half-assed apology since the time Bethy had the audacity to shade Queen Brenda.
Mr. Kennedy, thank you so much for being with us this evening. How are you doing, sir? Well,
I tell you right now, the words, I can't find the words. I'm standing here at the site. I made my way to the Maryvale Indian Residential School mass grave site, and to witness and view 751 markers is just, it's beyond belief. I am outraged. I'm saddened. I'm depressed. It's a sea of flags, red, blue, pink flags, but each one of them represents a former student.
You are a survivor, Mr. Kennedy, of that Maryvale Residential School.
Well, I got here when I was 5 years old.
Wow.
And, you understand the brutality of getting introduced to an education system that is foreign to us. Everything is done with a physical and brutal movement. Being slapped, being punched, hair being pulled, being kicked. Right from the moment that you enter the school ground. That's what you're faced with, and that along with the confusion of wondering, where's your family? That along with the confusion of being lonely, I've never had so, like, the feeling here is so heavy, right? This needs to be heard, not only to the Canadian citizens, but or North America. This has to be a worldwide cry of this is what systemic racism created. We don't know how these students died, whether it was loneliness and from starvation. And I talk about starvation because, as a 5-year-old, sometimes the food was so rancid that we threw up.
Wow.
We put it. And what did we get for that? They forced us to eat our vomit. And then your friends are missing, right? I got a friend that's missing. His name was Brian. And one night he was taken like everybody else, but he just didn't return. So is he here? Is he here amongst all these graves? Only time's going to answer that. But at the same time, I helped as an altar boy. We were called down to the church in early morning. We were made to put on our gowns. We were made to grab our little instruments, or religious instruments, and we were brought outside, and they were burying someone. Who it was, whether it was a boy or a girl, I don't know. But what I do know is that this individual was wrapped in a sheet, and there was a hole dug, and we put
So
whoever it was.
You actually witnessed that?
Oh, yeah, I witnessed it.
Mr. Kennedy, I appreciate everything you're going through right now, sir. It's an honor and a privilege to speak with you tonight. I wish you the best on your journey of healing. Thank you so much for being with us, sir.
Well, we all have to. I'm not going to heal alone. We have to heal as a country, right?
Right.
But, it was our government that played a hand in this, our church that played a hand in this, our police services that played a hand in this. Everybody's hands are dirty here. But we have to try and fix it in a respectful way so that we can move forward, not only as nations, Indigenous nations of Canada, but as a country. Right? We have to make this right. It's going to be a long process, but we got to make it right.
Unfortunately, we are not that far removed from these historical tragedies. These are people's grandparents and parents that we're talking about. The last residential school did not close until 1997. Let that sink in. The last residential school closed 1 year before Pokemon Red and Blue came out. However, since history books are written by biased white men, the atrocities committed under white supremacy are either downplayed or omitted entirely. The most I learned about Native Americans in school was probably a paragraph about the Trail of Tears and a little bit about the Cahokia Mounds. I'm pretty sure many well-meaning white people, such as myself, can identify with Bobby Hill in this clip.
Are you sure it's the white man who did all that stuff? Because I come from white people, and this is the first I'm hearing of it.
Yes, I am sure.
Wow.
Yes, wow.
And critical race theory is the new conservative boogeyman. And I'll say this, if critical race theory was being taught in schools, there probably wouldn't be assignments like this. When a Native Canadian 6th grader had to list 5 positive things about residential schools, the girl told her mom that at school they learned the worst thing that they went through was getting their hair cut.
Write at least 5 positive stories or facts about the residential schools from at least 3 different websites. This is the homework that my daughter was sent home with in grade 6 from a school that is aware that she is Aboriginal. We are First Nations, we live in Canada, and this is what they're sending. They're whitewashing the rape of our culture, the theft of our people, and the genocide of just everything in general when it comes to First Nations people. They're not teaching them the truth. 5 positive things about residential schools. Can you name 5 positive things about Nazis in the concentration camps? Can you name 5 positive things about slavery? This is not okay. Please share this and blow this up. This is what they're teaching your kids in school.
I agree, it's appalling and there should be repercussions. I chose this clip to demonstrate that in current year, the curriculum at a public school includes these kinds of objectively racist assignments. Since all this has gone down, Deborah Holland, the first ever Native American Secretary of the Interior, announced the Federal Indian Boarding School Initiative.
Another issue that is so personal to me is the devastating history of the U.S. government's boarding school policies. Like many of you, I was deeply impacted by the news of 215 Indigenous children found in a mass grave at a boarding school in Canada. I couldn't help but think of their families. Each of those children is a missing family member, a person who was not able to live out their purpose because forced assimilation policies ended their lives too soon. I thought of my own child who carries this generational trauma with them. I thought of my grandmother who told me about the pain and loneliness she endured when the trains took her away from her family to boarding school. I wept with the Indigenous members of our team here at Interior. Our communities are still mourning. The federal policies that attempted to wipe out Native identity, language, and culture continue to manifest in the pain our communities face, including longstanding intergenerational trauma, cycles of violence and abuse, disappearance of Indigenous people, premature deaths, mental disorders, and substance abuse. But now, for the first time, this country has a cabinet secretary who is Indigenous. I come from ancestors who endured the horrors of Indian boarding school assimilation policies carried out by the same department that I now lead, the same agency that tried to eradicate our culture, our language, our spiritual practices, and our people. To address the intergenerational impact of Indian boarding schools and to promote spiritual and emotional healing in our communities, we must shed light on the unspoken traumas of the past, no matter how hard it will be. For more than a century, the Interior Department was responsible for operating the Indian boarding schools across the United States and its territories. We are therefore uniquely positioned to assist in the effort to recover the dark history of these institutions that have haunted our families for too long. It's our responsibility. Today, I'm announcing and sharing with you all, first, that the department will launch the Federal Indian Boarding School Initiative. At no time in history have the records or documentation of this policy been compiled or analyzed to determine the full scope of its reaches and effects. We must uncover the truth about the loss of human life and the lasting consequences of these schools. This investigation will identify past boarding school facilities and sites, the location of known and possible burial sites located at or near school facilities, and the identities and tribal affiliations of children who were taken there. I know that this process will be long and difficult. I know that this process will be painful. It won't undo the heartbreak and loss that so many of us feel. But only by acknowledging the past can we work toward a future that we're all proud to embrace. I don't see it as my role to be the voice for all Native people, but rather to amplify your voices so that American Indian, Alaska Native, and Native Hawaiian communities have a seat at the table to speak for themselves. By sitting at this table together, we can build a better relationship for future generations that is not rooted in the worst parts of our past.
Residential schools are such a disgusting, horrible thing, and they need to be discussed because we can't forget history. You know what happens when you forget history and all that. Not to mention that the effect of residential schools didn't just stop when they were closed down. As you can see, there is a lot of intergenerational trauma, and I'm going to play you a clip.
There was a lot of fear. I think the fear that they put in him, the terror that they put in him, I mean, he managed to bring that with him, and it went into our family, you know. And I learned terror and fear and all that as well as a child. I put fear in my sons too. That's all I knew, you know. when they were doing something that was right, I would put fear in them, you know.
I know that I seem composed during this episode, but it's because I've had practice reading this script a few times. While researching, I cried a lot. I would even consider what I did to be weeping. I thought I had a decent grasp of racism and colonialism, but I had no idea. This was horrifying to learn about, and it's because of this horror that we can't forget these things. As a white person, I'm privileged that my family did not have to go through this kind of subjugation and genocide. It just wasn't talked about in my school, and that alone blows my mind. Non-white children do not have the option of not learning about racism. When they step outside of their home, they are entering a society that is built on white supremacy. A society that, yes, white people benefit from. Sorry, not sorry, but... sorry, my shit died, so here I am real quick to tell you, thanks for watching. Well, I mean, my microphone thing just fucking popped off. So, anyway, thanks for watching. Sorry this episode wasn't funny and quick-witted. I don't really think there would be a way for that to be possible. This is a very serious issue. If you guys know of any organizations that I can donate to, please let me know, because the only one that I really found was the Native American Rights Fund. Yeah, I'd love to help out. I don't know what to do. I mean, this is just... This shit is so fucked up, and literally, like I said, I'm just now learning about it, so that shows how deeply embedded racism is into our culture and our education system. I thought it was going to storm. I rushed in here to do this quickly so that I could catch the rain on camera, and then it stopped. So, you know what? That's just God's plan, and there's nothing you can do about it. So, please, if you like this video, consensually smash that like and subscribe button. I have resources in the info box below if you want more information, recommended videos, playlist. Follow me on Instagram, TikTok, all that good stuff. And please be kind to each other. Stay inside, drink some water because it's like deadly heat wave right now. And I love you, and thanks for being a friend.
It might just take one person to start talking about it, or perhaps a family to start talking about the fact that there is abuse, and the reason why there's that abuse is because of the residential school experience. That, you know, we're not abusive people by trade. We're not, we weren't born that way. And to be able to, I think families need to be able to realize that they're not alone, that none of us are alone anymore, that we have each other, and that it's okay to start talking about it.